and you're all welcome to our October meeting for the Clare Root Society, which we're delighted to be welcoming Dr. Ciarán Reilly from Maynooth. Just a couple of housekeeping matters there before we get started. Just a notice of sympathy that we want to acknowledge or want to say on the passing of Kay Mangan last week, whose daughter Clara Hoyne, many of you would know Clara, was a long-standing secretary for Clare Root Society and was one of the creators of the most recent conference that took place back in, I think, 2015 or 2016. I think it was 2015 or 2016 anyway. Very successful conference that took place at the West County. So we'd like to extend our sympathies to the Hoyne and to the Mangan families and their extended families on the passing of Clara's mother, Kay Mangan, who died last week. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we do have 3 books for sale. We have not had any book launches due to COVID restrictions, but we do have 3 books that are for sale. They're available in the usual places, being the Ennis Bookshop, O'Connor's Market and Veg Shop in the Market, and as well as that Mary Kelly's Newsagents, which is on O'Connell Street in Ennis. And those books are the Old Mill Street, the Military Barracks, which has actually just been published, and that should be on the shelves there, certainly if not in the next couple of days, within the next week. And then the Clooney Graveyard book, which was launched, or which was published there about a month ago or 6 weeks ago. So those are all available for sale, and for anybody that is interested in purchasing them, they can be purchased through any of those outlets. Okay. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking, because we want to hear from Dr. Reilly, Dr. Ciarán Reilly, and he's going to speak to us tonight about the famine evictions. For those of you who might be on Twitter, Dr. Ciarán is a very active participant in Twitter, and I got to know him through the Irish Famine Evictions project that he undertook there 7, 8, 9 years ago. I don't know how long ago it was now. Very, very interesting project where he mapped out a number of the evictions all over the country that took place during the famine. He's a historian for 19th and 20th century Ireland or Irish history. He has a particular interest in the famine, in country houses, landed estates, and the Irish Revolution, 1912 to 1923. His research collaborations include those with university colleagues in Ireland, Britain, Finland, South Africa, and the USA. So he's a pretty global person, his research collaboration. He's also a founding member of the European Forum for the Study of Country Houses and Landed Estates, and a member of the International Network of Irish Famine Studies and the North American Irish Famine Network. And he is also a professor at Maynooth University. So without further ado, Ciarán, welcome, and we're delighted to have you this evening.
Thank you, Jane. Good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be asked to speak to the Clare Root Society. Thank you, Jane, for that invitation in the first place, and for those kind words of introduction. I'll share a screen with you now, and you'll see some of what I'm going to speak about this evening. What I want to speak about this evening is famine evictions, and as Jane has mentioned there, for the last number of years I've been researching famine evictions right across the country. The quote that you see there on your screen, "Not a stone upon a stone left," is actually a description of eviction which took place in Doonbeg, County Clare in 1849. Now, I know that this evening I'll be speaking to the converted, and I see some of the audience that have joined us there. I see Eamon Healy there, who's done great work and shared indeed with me the famine evictions in County Galway. And I remember a couple of years ago meeting Paddy Waldron at a conference, I think in Limerick, and he shared with me some insights into famine evictions in Clare. I suppose from the outset, it's obvious that Clare is one of the counties that is very well circumstanced in the research which has been conducted about the Great Famine, and indeed about eviction, and the sources that are available through Clare Library Service, one of the best, I have to say, one of the best library services online in the country. It's fantastic for the study of evictions in the Kilrush Union. I'll touch upon some of that and perhaps some other examples of Clare evictions towards the end of the talk. I'll begin though by talking about probably the most celebrated murder which occurred during the course of the Great Famine. And that was the murder of Major Dennis Mahon in November 1847 in Strokestown, County Roscommon. Dennis Mahon was the owner of a 11,000 acre estate in County Roscommon, and in the summer of 1847 had undertaken an assisted emigration scheme, removing just under 1,500 people and assisting them in passage to Canada. Now, at the time, the local press were very supportive of Mahon for what he had actually carried out, but things turned sour very, very quickly. By the end of the summer, reports filtered back to Ireland and indeed to County Roscommon that many of those who had made the voyage to Canada, to Quebec, had actually perished at sea. And a plot was arranged to murder Dennis Mahon in retribution for the assisted emigration scheme, which had seen so many people fall to their demise, but also for a series of evictions which had commenced in September and October of 1847, and which would continue long after his death into 1848 and 1849. There was over 3,000 people evicted in 1848 and 1849 from this estate in Roscommon. But Dennis Mahon's murder was widespread news. It was said within an hour of the foul deed being perpetrated that several hills were lighted by bonfires in every direction, and the people celebrated the demise of Mahon. His murder was international news. Pope Pius IX mentioned it in Rome, and also Queen Victoria mentioned it or indeed wrote about it in her personal diary on the 5th of November, when she wrote, "A shocking murder has again taken place in Ireland. Major Mahon, who entirely devoted himself to being of use to the distressed Irish, was shot when driving home in his carriage. Really, they are a terrible people. It is a constant source of anxiety and annoyance." I mentioned Mahon by way of introduction tonight because in 2014, I published a book on the Strokestown estate, having gone through close to 50,000 documents from the famine period for that particular estate, probably the largest famine collection which survives anywhere in the world. And I suppose one of the dangers as a historian, or indeed as a genealogist, is to come to conclusions and you find that a short time after that your own conclusions have been challenged. It's one thing to be challenged by other historians, but when you begin challenging yourself, that's where the fun starts. And that's always, I think, it's good to actually do that. In 2016, I commenced the Irish Famine Eviction project, and I'm going to return to the story of Mahon in a few minutes, and that's why I mention him by way of introduction here. Eviction during the famine period, and I loosely term the famine period to mean from 1838, following the introduction of the Irish Poor Law Act, right through to the last reports of blight, which occurred across the country in 1853. Eviction is associated more than anything with the famine. While most clearances and evictions were carried out without publicity in the pre-famine period, the famine was quite different. And we see an upsurge in reporting on the evictions which occur throughout the country. Historians have long concerned themselves with trying to ascertain just how many people were actually evicted during the Great Famine, and the numbers vary, but I think most will agree that it's somewhere in the region of about 250,000 families evicted from the land. Now, if we multiply that by the average number of people per house, which is a very difficult thing to try and do, but some estimates suggest that the average household was about 5 to 6. Now, those of you studying County Clare will probably tell me that the average was quite higher. I know for Roscommon, you could see 10, 11, 12 people per house at that time. So we're looking at somewhere about 1 million people affected by eviction and clearance and the levelling of houses in that short period towards the end of the 1840s. Eviction comes in 4 great waves, and I suppose for the historian or the genealogist studying this period, these are the 4 big periods to be aware of. The first is, as I mentioned already, the introduction of the Irish Poor Law Act. So this is the act that allows for the creation of the workhouse. Now, what we see across the country is a slow process of eviction commencing after 1838, when landlords, safe in the knowledge that the workhouse will soon be built to provide accommodation and shelter for people, begin to evict people from the land. It's also a time where landlords begin to embellish their domains or to improve lands, bring about new agricultural methods and techniques such as draining and so forth, ideas which are brought from Scotland and England and from the continent, from Holland and Belgium, into Ireland in the 1830s by land agents and land stewards. And so landlords begin to increase their domains or embellish them in some way, and a lot of people are actually evicted. The second phase, and there's 2 phases within the second phase, I lumped them together because the 1841 and 1852 general elections actually bring about a rise in eviction right across the country. So this is before the days of the Secret Ballot Act, where people that were voting in the general election had to declare in public who they were actually voting for. And we see landlords and their agents gaining retribution for people voting against the landlord or his representative at election time. And so 1841 and 1852 are the big surges that we see there. And we can chart that very, very easily at the time. The third phase is the Gregory Act, or the Quarter Acre Clause. So this only occurs, we see the first big wave of famine eviction occurring from 1847 onwards with the introduction of the Gregory Act, or the Quarter Acre Clause. Prior to this, a lot of landlords had acted quite benevolently, had forgiven rents, had granted abatements, and in general had tried to relieve their tenants as best they could. Prior to the introduction of this act, we see a number of landlords actually writing estate rules, writing down and publicly proclaiming what the rules are for tenants going forward. And this was very clear what they were actually trying to do. Break the rules and you would be evicted. And so there was, the idea was that there would be no backlash from the public or from the press if rules had been broken. And the fourth phase of eviction that we see is the Encumbered Estates Act, the introduction of the Encumbered Estates Court after 1849. This was brought about to relieve the amount of debt which had accrued across the country on landed estates. And here we see landlords evicting tenants prior to an estate being sold in the Encumbered Estates Court, and likewise incoming owners of an estate evicting tenants because they had no connection to them, or indeed it was felt that they had no right to provide for them. Why did landlords evict? Well, there's lots of reasons why they evicted, and it varies from place to place and from estate to estate. The biggest one, of course, is the arrears of rent. So in the east of the country, we see most landed estates would have had arrears of about 15 to 20% of the annual rental. But the scale was enormous in the west. I began by talking about the Mahon estate in Roscommon, and rents had gone uncollected there from 1842, 1843. And this is largely because there was 3 disastrous wet summers in Ireland in 1840, 41 and 42. Tenants were still recovering from the effects of the night of the big wind in 1839. And they had found themselves in such a level of poverty that they couldn't afford to pay the rent, not just on the Mahon estate, but elsewhere as well. And so by 1845, when the blight appeared and the potatoes failed, it spelled disaster for many estates. Landlords also evict because of the poor law charge, where they have to subsume the charge for the workhouse or the local poor law union. They begin to evict tenants instead of paying the charge for them and for that land. As I mentioned, others evict because of big house and domain embellishment at the time. Others evict because of murder and crime. So the levels of crime spiral from the 1830s onwards. I have described Ireland in the past, or in the past I've described Ireland in the 1840s as probably being the most dangerous place on earth. If you didn't witness a crime, if you weren't a victim of crime, you knew somebody who was. Murder was a daily occurrence right across the country, but particularly in Munster and along the western seaboard and in other parts of Connaught. You'll be glad to know that your neighbours in County Tipperary probably led the way for murder and crimes of all sorts. And for that reason, at the time, Tipperary was known simply as Bloody Tipperary. Another reason for eviction, as I mentioned, was agriculture. And this, I suppose, new wave of agricultural improvement, which commenced in the 1830s in a big way, people are evicted from the land. So they're just some of the reasons why people evicted tenants in the 1840s. There was a process to eviction, but was not always adhered to. And I think that's probably the most important thing to say. While some landlords adhered to the rules of law, others didn't. And certainly middlemen, I'll touch upon middlemen as we go through the talk, and with particular reference to County Clare. Middlemen quite often didn't adhere to the rules of law and evicted them without the proper procedures. In the first instance, landlords would try to distrain crops or animals in lieu of rent and arrears. Where this didn't work, or they were thwarted from doing so, they would proceed before the courts, and a notice of eviction was given. It could range from a month to 6 months, and then once the final eviction date had passed, a team would move in, not always supported by the police. I think we have this image of the police being present at most evictions during the famine. This is simply not true. On most occasions, it was a small team they were known as wreckers, hut tumblers, levelers, and so on. These would have been part of the estate administration. So a land agent would have employed a team around them to carry out these duties. Rent warners to instruct the tenants when rent was due. A team of watchers to watch to make sure the crops weren't lifted from the ground and carried away. And then this team of wreckers or hut tumblers. And, you know, one of the things that creates animosity in relation to famine evictions is the fact that a lot of the people that carried out the levelling were local people themselves. And I think I'll touch upon that in a few minutes. The physical force and the heavy-handed tactics, this creates a long-lasting social memory of what has occurred. I'm thinking there in particular of the Toomevara evictions, the estate of Reverend Massey Dawson, where 500 people were evicted in 1849. Lasting legacy and the bitterness, the transfer of land, 135 one-acre holdings is reduced to 37,000 after the famine. And for those that are left, there's a bitterness as to you know, who got land and who was evicted from land. There's a number of evictions across the country which I suppose are well known and reported upon. Kilrush in County Clare, of course, with the Vandeleurs. Ballinrobe in County Mayo, where Lord Lucan evicted thousands of people from. Toomevara, which I mentioned, Massey Dawson's, and the Gerard estate in Ballinlass in County Galway, the Mahons in Roscommon, and so on. And these are well known and well documented. I was just highlighting the well-known evictions. There are a number of well-known evictions across the country. my own interest in plotting and mapping evictions began a few years ago in doing this and writing about County Offaly. And by mapping evictions, we can tell an awful lot. This is an example from Offaly. So we can see that in northeast Offaly, in areas around Edenderry, there are very few evictions during the famine, whereas to the south of the county and to the west of the county, there's high levels of evictions occurring during the famine years. What is curious is that some evictions were carried out and weren't documented, or indeed aren't remembered today. And just this example I have here of the levelling of 57 houses in a place called Bracknell in County Offaly in 1851, 700 people evicted in one day. There's no report in the local newspapers. And the only reference I've found to it, apart from oral memory, is in the diaries of John Plunkett Joly, who wrote just simply on the 20th of June, most of the houses of Bracknell pulled down today. A very cold description of the removal of 700 people. John Plunkett Joly, of course, had a connection with County Clare. He owned a small estate, I think of about 3,000 acres around Mayasta. Scientific Earl, yes, I know I mentioned about the estate rules, that's why I had him there. So what I tried to do, as Jane mentioned from the outset, was about 5 or 6 years ago, I commenced to document where possible evidence of eviction, the physical location, the landlord's name, the number evicted, the source of information, and where possible to include information about tenants' names. Now, this is done solely as the first part of the project was done using simply newspapers as the source. I wasn't concerned with parliamentary papers, which are, as I mentioned, are very prominent for County Clare in the Kilrush Union area, or indeed estate rentals. These could all be separate parts of the project. I'm hoping to convince others to come with me on this journey of mapping famine evictions, because one can go a little bit crazy when you're trying to plot these things. And as I mentioned, Eamon Healy has kindly offered the Galway eviction. So that's something I hope to do more on in the coming months. To date, I've mapped over 1,000 eviction sites, showing how the famine impacted upon the lives of about 20.
Oh dear.
Yeah, we're frozen again.
Oh dear.
We'll give it a minute there. I think what might, are you okay there, Ciarán?
Yeah, I can hear you there, yeah.
Great, okay. No, you froze for a second there. I'm just wondering if what we should do, those of us might turn off our video, because that might help with the internet connection. Now, I'm happy to stop my video, and you keep going. I know a number of people have turned off their video, but actually I see a lot of people have done that. So it might be the right thing to do. It just will keep the connection maybe more secure, other than
Perfect.
yourself, obviously. We don't want you turning off your video.
Okay.
You're okay anyway, keep going.
Perfect, yeah. No, I mentioned that 25,000 people is a very small amount compared to the million that are evicted. But it's providing new evidence, and some of this is remarkable about what it's actually telling us. So that's the project in 2016, when I commenced just to plot and map the famine evictions. And you can see how it's grown quite quickly. These are the sites of eviction. So what an eviction site looks like when it's mapped, then this is just an example from Offaly. So you will get the GPS location, the location. So here we have Cloncollig in Offaly. The landlord is the Earl of Charleville. The number of evicted, it's just one family here. The names of the families not given. The agent or bailiff not given, but the source, the Leinster Express, 4th of January 1845. So that is there for the 1,000+ eviction sites. And you can just hover over it and actually have a look. There is problems and challenges. Townland names vary over time. So and I know a lot of you will realize this, it's difficult to actually identify. So I have close to 500 unidentified sites at the moment, because the townland spelling is different, or I can't be 100% sure where it is. Another problem is tenants are actually readmitted. So they're listed as being evicted, but the landlord or his agent has a change of heart and actually readmits them. Another problem is local newspaper bias. And I'll come back to this in a few minutes when I'm talking about Clare, because we see this in particular, where people are reluctant to report on eviction in their locality because it might offend the landlord or his agent. So for genealogists, for historians, for people interested in finding out about an eviction, look at a newspaper outside your county. Very often, the Clare evictions will be found in the Kerry, the Limerick, the Tipperary, and the Galway newspapers, and not the Clare newspapers. Another problem and challenge we have is that eviction soon becomes the norm. So what in 1846 and 47 was newsworthy, by 1848 and 49 is not newsworthy, and people don't report on evictions. So that is a problem that I've encountered with this project. But what it is unveiling is that the evictors, the people that carried out the evictions, come from a broad swathe of society. So we have the earls and the lords and the sirs, the aristocracy, the landed gentry. They are evicting people, and we know that. But also we have this huge underbody of landlords who are merchants, shopkeepers, doctors. I think there's a Dr. Donovan, just trying to look through my notes there, from County Clare, who was amongst the evictors. The evictors come from all religious persuasions. So there are quite a few Catholic landlords evicting tenants. We mightn't have presumed that at first. There are a number of schools and institutions which are evicting. So the College of Physicians, they have a lot of landed property across the country. They evict tenants in the 1840s, principally because the college is coming under financial pressures and they need money, and the land is the way in which they get that. Trinity College is one of the largest evictors at this time, and indeed was the largest landed estate across the country. The college owned close to 190,000 acres of land across Ireland at this time. And you also find individuals such as Arthur Guinness, and I just throw him in there because he's a household name and we all know who he is. Evicted tenants in Wexford when the famine commenced. The thing about merchants and shopkeepers is from about 1830 onwards, a lot of merchants and shopkeepers start to buy up small pockets of land. This is about 50 to 100 acres of land. And when the famine hits after 1845, these people have no affinity to the people on the land. And so they're amongst the first to evict their tenants. So to return to Strokestown, one of the things that the project has shown is that preconceived ideas or conclusions that have been arrived at in the past may not have been the case. And the case of Mahon at Strokestown is interesting. I've plotted there, and you can see the screen grab of the Mahon estate evictions from 1847. So each represents a townland where Major Mahon selected tenants for the assisted emigration scheme of 1847. At this time, Major Mahon was trying to bring the railway from Longford to the town of Strokestown along the route of what is now the main artery, the main roadway through from Tarmanbarry to the town of Strokestown. If you see the proliferation of red dots there, they correspond with the proposed route of the railway. So it begs the question, was Mahon removing people to get ready for the railway? Or why were they selected from this townland? I think it's pretty clear what he's actually trying to do. So the assisted emigration scheme of 1847 might well be an assisted eviction of 1847. There are other findings then which are quite interesting. The case of Biddy McLaughlin in Buncrana, County Donegal. She was evicted from her holding and cruelly beaten in the process when she tried to prevent the wreckers. The interesting thing about this story is when it went to court in Derry, that Biddy McLaughlin claimed that the people that were wrecking her house, tearing it down for the landlord, were actually her first cousins. Similarly, James Cuffe, the Mayo Evictor. Cuffe owned a huge estate near Ballinrobe. Cuffe was a member of the Repeal Party and one of Daniel O'Connell's chief lieutenants in County Mayo. When the famine hit, Cuffe was hit financially himself and was amongst the first to evict. About 350 individuals evicted from the land. So while Daniel O'Connell and the Repeal Party are in the House of Commons commenting on the actions of Irish landlords evicting tenants across the country, individual members of the Repeal Party like James Cuffe are actually evicting tenants of their own. And the project has helped to identify disappeared townlands, and I'm sure this is going to be the case for Clare as well. This is the townland of Tulsk, and I'm grateful to Jody Moylan for sharing this with me. Jody got in touch with me when he's seen or read about the project. In the picture, you can see the townland of Drimna near Tulsk, and mapped on the right-hand side there from 1838 from the Ordnance Survey. This townland was teeming with people in 1845 prior to the arrival of the Plate of Light, but a series of evictions led to it appearing as it does today. And the same for Lisgobbin in County Roscommon. Again, another Mahon estate. You can see it there pictured, an aerial photograph on it. Only one house in the vicinity of the townland of Lisgobbin, where there were several hundred people living, 32 houses in total, levelled on a single day in 1849. The project has compiled a great deal of information which would be useful for genealogy, and to date it's an aspect of the project which I've done very little with, so it's very useful to talk to a group like this evening, and I would like to hear ideas about how the information could be used. Alongside the newspaper reports, we are given, in most cases, I would say about 80% of cases, were given the actual details of the evicted. So we see here examples from Borrisalee in County Tipperary, the widow Patrick Kennedy and one child, consisting of two, Tim Harrington, wife and 3 children, numbering 5, John Dunn, wife and 4 children, numbering 5. The Mayo Telegraph there below, you'll see Roger Palmer's estate, the number Pat Shaughnessy, 10 in family, Pat Moyle at 6, and so on. And so there's a great deal of information there, and particularly this would be useful for people trying to bridge that gap where we often stumble when we're researching family histories back to the famine period and before it. Of course, as I mentioned from the outset, there's great sources available for Kilrush, the Union of Kilrush in County Clare, on the Clare Library website. But perhaps just to talk for a few minutes about the evictions in Clare and what that's telling us from the database. Of the 1,000+ sites that I've mapped, I think about 105 are located in County Clare. That accounts for about 10% of the overall total. Understandably, a lot of the evictions relate to estates such as the Westrop, the Vandeleur, the Massey, the Westby estates, all located around Kilrush, and the evictions which were carried out there in 1848 and 1849. Of course, Killard, famously depicted by the Illustrated London News, is also included, where the Blackhawls evicted 105 people in October of 1849. But there are a lot of people mentioned from County Clare, and perhaps maybe merchants or shopkeepers and so on. And only further study will actually reveal that, and collaboration, I hope. People like Mrs. Dwyer, Mrs. Hickman, Mrs. Hillman, evicting people. And what of Scariff, the town of Scariff, Fitzgerald and Arthur and Martin and Brodie, who between them evicted 120 people on one day in October 1849. There's also quite a few of the Clare evictions carried out as estates were in the hands of minors. That is, where the landlord was deceased and his sons or children had not actually come of age. One example of this is Stackpool Estate in 6 Mile Bridge, where 233 people were evicted in April 1848. And generally speaking, where land agents were left in charge of these estates, they didn't defer to the family, and they carried out evictions as they saw fit. Of course, County Clare is closely associated with one of the worst evictors of people, Marcus Keane, and his name crops up all over the newspapers, even with estates that he's not actually connected with. The actions of land agents and bailiffs and their team of wreckers are often compared to Marcus Keane, how bad or how nasty he had actually become. There are other estates then where large-scale evictions occur. Marcus Patterson in Killaloe evicted 27 people in July of 1849, and Michael Dalton, 52 people in Tulla. But there are some unknown estates, or estates where people are evicted from, but no owner is given, making it hard to actually identify the location. I'm thinking there of the 101 people who were evicted in March 1848 from Knocknaskea and Stone Park. These people are not identified, nor are their landlord. There certainly is evidence of encumbered estate courts evictions, and I mentioned these earlier, where estates are cleared either prior to a sale or after a sale. An example of this, or what strikes me to be an encumbered estate sale based on its date, is the evictions which occurred at Ballydonnell, carried out by John O'Callaghan in September 1851. 43 families were evicted, numbering 213 people. To me, that looks like a clearance carried out so as to make an estate more profitable for sale. There are other large, I'm looking through notes here, there are other large evictions noted in the database for Clare. And of course, there are certainly many that I haven't included. Ina, the village of Ina, the Baron Richards evicted 35 people in November 1848. John Scott in Milltown Malbay evicted 39 families, numbering 150 people in 1849. And there are other reports about evictions, such as in Bunratty, where William Armstrong evicted people, but also the fact that houses were levelled on this occasion. And it's not always the case where it's mentioned in reports, but in Bunratty, 20 houses were levelled in 1849, September 1849. I mentioned the reports of evictions and how they are reflected in local newspapers. You see here some examples. This is from the Nation newspaper. More evictions in Clare. I think this is Marcus Patterson in Killaloe that I mentioned. And again, the tenants named. This is all very useful for genealogy and indeed for understanding how the famine impacted local communities. So you can see families there. Thomas Nealon, and it says he was both lame and blind, wife and children. John McNamara, wife and 6 children. Peggy Malone with others living by lodgings. Daniel Garvey, wife and 3 children, and so on. This is the problems with middlemen. This is the eviction of families at Tremora West, 52 families. So this is a huge amount of people evicted by William Casey. And the problem here was that the people had actually paid the rent to a middleman who fell into arrears, who in turn couldn't pay William Casey, the landlord. So William Casey stepped in and actually evicted the people from the land. And it's interesting, that example, and it's worth noting, it's important to understand the landholding system in Ireland at that time. You had landlords at the top who rented large tracts of land to middlemen. So William Casey, in this case, has rented to a middleman who perhaps rented to a strong farmer, perhaps 50 to 100 acres, who in turn rented to small farmers, who in turn had a host of cottiers or landless labourers under them. And so there's very little connection between these people at the bottom level of society and the landlord. And indeed, many landlords saw that they had no affinity or that they had no connection to these people at the bottom. And so they could evict at will without any sort, any anxiety or regret for having done so. Take again the Mahan estate in Roscommon, the example that I used there. When Dennis Mahan conducted a census of his estate in 1847, he found that he had 12,000 people living on his holdings. He'd only 745 people actually paying rent. According to his rental, that's all he had on the books, 745 people, yet there were 12,000 people living on the land. So there was about 6,000 people who are in this category of small farmer to cottier. And so there's no onus on Mahan to keep them. And this, as we've seen, is replicated in Clare. More examples here. This is the Vandeleurs and Kilrush and Killard, which are well known. And also Dunmore, the property of Mr. Scott, that was another huge 140 houses. The whole village of Doonbeg is also evicted. That's 1849, September 1849, which I commenced with. And of course, the usual references, as I mentioned, to Marcus Keane, his team of records at a place called Rehig. It says he has, we are told, a troop of 20 of them engaged for 2 days demolition. In addition to this, notice has been given that if any tenant receives one of his unhoused and unsheltered fellow occupiers, the following day will see him too, together with his family, an outcast for his charity. One of the reasons why we know so much about famine evictions and famine evictions, particularly in County Clare, is thanks to people like James McCarthy. McCarthy was proprietor of the Limerick and Clare Examiner. And in his own words, he undertook a pilgrimage amid scenes of havoc and despair. He undertook to visit counties chiefly in the West, and in turn it inspired other newspaper editors, in particular the editor of the Leinster Express newspaper, which was published in the Midlands. McCarthy travelled all throughout Clare and Limerick and was unafraid to publish details of what he saw before him. Just one example of some of the imagery that he paints at a scene of eviction in Clare. He said, the gaunt and miserable being hunted there as wolves by the bloodhounds of the unchristian, that diabolical system which had turned many into desert wastes and howling wilderness. In other instances, as I say, the Galway newspapers in particular pick up on Clare evictions, particularly evictions which occur along the Galway border. And so, as I mentioned, it is useful to turn your attention there if you're researching and if you're interested in finding something about famine evictions, to turn your attentions there. Likewise, and just to mention with estate rentals, it is useful to keep an eye out for the land agent concerned, because often they're connected with several different estates at the one time. And so estate rentals may not appear to survive for the given estate that you're looking for, but they may in fact be lumped in with some other estate for which a land agent was in charge of. And just to conclude and to show you some other examples of Clare evictions that are recorded in the database, you can see the numbers there that are actually concerned. We'll see here, this is Mayada Moore, Henry Burton, 28 people, but above it there, Mr. Burrows has evicted 482, down to Nicholas Westby, 403 people, John Singleton, the Blackhawls, we mentioned them already at the start, Scott's minor, again an estate where a minor was in charge, or an agent was actually overseeing control for them. The Marcus Cunningham, of course, the McDonalds, Hickmans, and so on. So Clare represents a huge total of what has been compiled to date. I know there are others who are working on aspects of this, and I hope that some of you will have information about Clare evictions that you would like to contribute. The project, since it started in 2016, has benefited greatly from the contribution of people around the country. And just to note that every contribution is recorded and noted and credited. The site is actually down at the moment. For those of you that go frantically looking for it, Irish Famine Eviction is well, the map is not functioning properly. There's just a technical glitch there, but it will be online again soon. And the other eviction sites that have been gathered to date will be added to it. And hopefully that the Galway evictions that Eamon has shared will go there too. And hopefully this talk this evening might inspire some Clare evictions that aren't recorded. And there's surely bound to be several of those. And you might consider contributing to this project. So I think I've spoken there for about 50 minutes. I hope I've given you an overview of famine eviction, why it occurred, how it occurred, where it occurred, and whetted your appetite. And I'd gladly take any questions now. So thank you very much for listening.
That's great. Thanks, Ciarán. That's very, very interesting. You mentioned, just quickly, I think, Knocknageeha and Stone Park. Mm-hmm. And those are two townlands in Fecal Parish. If those are the ones I think you might be referring to, just as a matter of interest. Do we have any questions there? I'm sure we have questions from people there. I'm just gonna. There are a number of questions now. Now let me see. Is there a way, this is from For the Shamrocks, is there a way to see if a certain particular family was evicted? Are there resources to track, I think what he means, or she means, who kept this information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that one of the best places to search is the newspapers in the first instance. Have a look through newspapers with particular names and particular areas that you're searching for. Estate rentals, of course, is another brilliant resource for this as well. They're probably the two best sources. I had always envisaged that the second part of this project will move on to estate rentals. And I think they're the two best sources.
So estate rentals and newspapers are two good ones. Just a note from Eric Shaw that the village of Clare is noted in the county evictions, and I believe that's Clare Castle, which was known as Clare. And somebody else had a question. Were there evictions on a similar scale in the towns and cities? For example, whole tenement buildings or streets? And this, Ciarán Reilly notes that the petty sessions have lots of cases of people prosecuted for holding possession of a room, not paying the rent, especially in Limerick.
Well, that's from Jared, is it?
Yes.
That question. That's an excellent question, Jared, and that is an excellent area of research for somebody if it hasn't been done or commenced already. That is really, yeah, that is something that I haven't thought about before. Okay. People actually in the towns and cities, and you're quite right. The petty session records are another great source. Of course, also online in many instances. That is a very interesting. Yeah, that's food for thought. That's definitely is. I haven't looked at it myself.
Yeah, there's another project now coming out of that, which is great. Now, Eamon Healy has just thanks for a great talk, as always, very informative. From your research, Ciarán, have you seen many landlords evict their tenants on estates that crossed county boundaries about the same time? And if you have, would this have been a common occurrence? And he's just noting he has come across landlords in Donegal who had land in Fermanagh, Leitrim, and Donegal, and they appear to have carried out evictions about the same time. And he wonders if this was possibly evidence of an estate-wide policy.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. It could well be an estate policy. I've seen examples on the Mayo Roscommon border where they're carrying out eviction on both sides of a county border at the same time.
Okay.
I'm at times I think county boundaries mattered very little. We're so ingrained now with our county boundaries thanks to the GAA, but at times they don't actually matter a whole lot. But that's interesting. Isn't it a state policy to do it? It's a good question.
And he has a second comment. He couldn't agree more about your comment about the newspaper bias regarding the reporting of evictions. Excuse me. He's also seen that oral information can sometimes be sketchy, and he notes that, for example, around Gord William Gregory has a legacy today, which suggests he did not evict, but the documents suggest otherwise. And he is not the most popular person back home when he reminds people of this. That I think that's very true too, that we do see some of these landlords as being much more compassionate when in fact they were undertaking evictions, or right?
And landlords are very quick in the post-famine period to actually chart their own history of what has just happened, and do it very quickly. I showed an image of the Earl of Ross there, the Scientific Earl who built the telescope during the famine, and I skipped by it, but to mention him, and I would have mentioned at that stage about him, was that he's one of the evictors that we see in the database. Quite a few evictions occur, not in the town of Burr, but on the outlying parts of this 25,000 acre estate. But in 1867, when he died, the local parish priest, who was the parish priest in Burr at the time of the famine, noted that the third Earl of Ross had never evicted a tenant. So here you have the priest who had witnessed the evictions in 1847, 20 years later has either forgotten that there was evictions, or has a different story to portray. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Now, Jane O'Brien has a comment. Wonderful talk, she says, and thank you. Do you have any insights in your sources into the emotions experienced by the evictors or those evicted that might allow us to better understand how such acts were perceived by society at that time?
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of the commentary tends to be repeated. So, you might see an eviction in Tulla, and 2 weeks later there's an eviction in 6 Mile Bridge, and it's the same wording, the same emotions are reflected. Certainly, there's a lot of commentary about the people that actually do the leveling. They're perceived to be, they're described as monsters and ogres in the contemporary reports, particularly in the Limerick and Clare Examiner. McCarthy is very good at that. Doesn't name them, of course, but to call them monsters and ogres is probably reflects how local people view them.
And the interesting thing that I have come across, and like I just locally said about certain families that were noted as being part of the the eviction party, so to speak, that were the levelers. So that idea of that person being involved that's still in the community today, or their ancestors, their descendants are still in the community today, have that associated with their family. So that is interesting. Like time does not forget a lot of things, maybe forget some things, but it doesn't forget everything. So that is interesting. Yeah. That's now I don't know if we have any other questions. I don't see anybody.
Jane, there was one at the very last.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I couldn't get down that far. Talk to me.
Just Trish Hackett Nicola is asking, is there a handout? And there isn't one as such, but we are doing the recording, and that will be up on the YouTube website within 7 days.
I'm just popping my email address into the chat. It'll be there for everyone. If anyone would like to contact me, they can. Happy to discuss all things famine related.
Great. That's great. That's terrific now. So if everybody wants to take a note of Ciarán's address, email ciarán.j.reilly@mu.ie. And so hopefully you can screenshot that now or take a note of that from your computer and to contact him. So if we don't have any more questions, I think I asked or I added everything or at the beginning there. Just thank you very much, Ciarán. That was very, very interesting, and certainly it's very interesting the Clare the Clare evictions that you brought in, not just from Kilrush and Killard, but all over the county that were that took place, and the many more. And the I think there's something we could all probably do something towards that project, a number of us with local information. So I hope I certainly will be in contact with you, because there's something I want to share with you. But thank you very much. It's excellent and very, very interesting. And like you said, there's probably other projects that can come out of it as well, or it can go into the estate rentals. So much appreciated. And we're getting lots of great feedback from people as well. Now, I just want to mention that our next talk will take place on the 18th of November. It's a Zoom talk, and it will be, our speaker will be Colm Liddy from Newmarket-on-Fergus, a local historian who will be speaking about the O'Briens of Dromoland. Colm has published a book there during the lockdown long ago in Newmarket-on-Fergus, very colorful, full of photographs and stories on Newmarket-on-Fergus. And he is since published recently another book on long ago in Dromoland about the O'Brien family. So he's going to be talking to us about the O'Briens there on the 18th of November, a Thursday night, the third Thursday of the month. It's a Zoom lecture, it's 8 p.m. and we will be sending out a link. So for those of you quickly that may not have joined the Clare Root Society, would you please do so by getting hold of our secretary, or sending our secretary at clareroots.org and giving us your details, and we can put you on the list so that you can be informed of other lectures, future lectures that'll take place, as well as any book launches and other events, hopefully, that we will be able to do in the future. And Ciarán just has a quick note here. For newspapers, try the Irish Newspaper Archive, the British Newspaper Archive for Limerick and Clare Examiner. And thanks, Aileen, for giving that email address. That's great. Anyway, thank you very, very much again, Ciarán. Delighted to have you come and speak to us. And thanks everybody for attending and for your questions and participation and interest in the topic. So everybody have a good night, and hopefully we'll see you in another 4 weeks for the next talk. So thanks again.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.